It's a new day. We're testing as we go. I am so excited to have you here. I think I just talked into the camera while I was on mute for quite a while. So
I was doing the same thing. We were having a great conversation. We just
So listen, we're gonna have a fantastic 52 minutes.
Okay.
To make up for it. It is so nice to see you here. Even better to see and hear you. Hey, I'm going to try this newfangled, while you get acquainted to the agenda, which you should be able to click on and see. Okay. That includes the upcoming question I'm going to ask you after I use this nifty functionality to play a video from the Creative Constructor Lab.
Oh, cool.
So people can get into that and check out what it is we're talking about. So I'm going to hide you, but you're not going anywhere.
So many ways you can incorporate this into your instruction and share this out. This doesn't have to be something that happens only in a physical, like in an actual classroom. It can happen in distance learning as well.
My big thing is creating your own AR and VR assets so that you don't have to spend a fortune on buying assets. You get your kids in the creation process.
I'm really fascinated with how we can have projects where our students can show what they know, demonstrate their learning to make it relevant to their lives. So we're going to talk about podcasting, explainer videos, digital books, all these great ideas.
It is so awesome to have you here, Richard. We are we're kind of getting all of this working at once. So I'm told too from my moles that there were also like I had scrolling text going, all kinds of things, and I've used this platform before. So, but this is kind of what it's like, right? It's like we are all in this moment of learning what it's like to bring network together, to have meaningful dialogue, to run in what ways we can, not just analogs of the things we were doing in person, but hopefully new and better, right? And different and filling in gaps. So I wish I could say it was by design that the first few minutes looked flubby, but that's kind of where we are in this moment.
That's kind of how I feel about this whole year. It's been a little flubby.
I actually just I have a tie on, so you can't see it, but I just got a flubby neck tattoo.
Yeah.
That's just 2021.
Right. That's what it is. Yeah.
So the CCL, I'm really excited to talk about, the Creative Constructor Lab. It's a couple of years old already. So tell me a little, before we get into what it was like and how flubby it was for you. I'm sure it wasn't, because you're smarter than I am. But tell me about what the original goals for CCL were, and just a little bit of the history for folks who don't know it.
Sure. So what we did a couple years ago, I guess 3 years ago now, we were talking about the conversations that we felt like needed to be happening in the education space. And one of the things that we were really concerned about is there was this big push around STEM and STEAM, well, STEM really. And by the way, before I say anything else, we are huge believers in STEM, and we believe that kids should know math and science and engineering and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But we were concerned that the use of technology for creativity and creative arts and creative thinking and design was sort of being left out of the conversation. And we actually believe that the most exciting things that can be done with technology are when you use them to empower students to design and create and build. And so we decided it was time to start an event, and we purposely wanted it to be a smaller event. We've kept it to be a small event. Our other events, we know we do some very large events, and they're fun. You get to talk to 20, 30,000 educators from all around the world. But we wanted this one to be a little more intimate. And so we pulled together a group of teachers and experts, creators. And that's what we did. And the two that we did were in person, and we had these big kind of creative, festive moments. This time we just finished was an online version, but it was also still highly creative, very interactive. And so talking about how do we use technology to encourage increased creativity among students and teachers.
So I have actually, one of the things that I love about solo is off. One of the things I love in this role that I get to play, whether it's for NAF and our research and tech talks or the podcast that I produce, is I get to do tons of research that I would have been doing anyway, as part of my day job on the people that make the work of this field really important. And so I did all kinds of Google stalking because it's been a couple of years since you and I saw each other. Yeah. And although we've been in touch over social media as it usually happens.
Yep.
Great. I heard it. I got a great Richard Culatta quote for you.
Uh-oh.
Ready? You said, presenting content to a kid is the least interesting thing we can do in a virtual learning space. Much more exciting is when we take advantage of the technology so that the world around us becomes part of the learning experience. I think that's such a fantastic, I don't know if it came out of your mouth.
Apparently I said that. I do believe it very strongly. So
I ordered up some t-shirts for myself and my family. I think it's fantastic. But so with that quote in mind, tell me, you committed to a live event this year.
Yep.
How did it go? What did ISTE learn?
So we learned a lot. So this is, and actually, we'll do a sort of a two-parter here. So we did our creative constructor was supposed to be a live event, and we ended up deciding that we needed to move it to a virtual event for all the reasons that you all know. But here's what happened. When we knew we were going to have to make it virtual, our team started looking at we signed up for all of the of online events that we could. And we were trying to get inspired. We're going to take all the ideas and steal all the best ideas and go do something really awesome.
Yeah.
Instead, we came back and we were just kind of depressed because they were all they just were not good experiences. They were lots of pre-recorded video, lots of, this whole thing, lots of shoving content at people. But our events, if you've ever been to an ISTE event before, our events are very interactive. The content is only a small portion of why you go. You go to meet new people, to learn new ideas, a lot of spontaneous stuff. We have things called playgrounds where we do lots of playing. And that just doesn't work if you are just pre-recording a bunch of speakers. So the team made a really tough decision. And we decided that we were going to build an online event platform from the ground up. And so we started working very quickly in partnership with we have a partnership with the University of Oregon. So in partnership with the University of Oregon, we designed a platform to be able to do events that are the style that our events are, which is highly engaging, highly interactive. So we used Creative Constructor Lab as a chance to kick the tires on that. And it worked really well. And we had some great experience. We've actually learned some things. And so there's now a new version, a version 2.0 of that we're going to roll out for our main event, our ISTE, what we call ISTE Live, which is the online version of our ISTE conference, which will be happening in next month, end of November 29th.
It's killing me. I think I'm having some connection issues. You there?
I am there. I can hear you now.
Oh, awesome.
Okay.
So you can also hear my dog barking in the background, which, is also par for the course.
You may hear mine. That's how it goes.
As a live broadcast during COVID goes. So the other thing that I loved doing in terms of catching up with you without being able to spend time together beforehand. Yeah. I'm going to read off some titles. Okay. Tell me if you've heard these before. So these are all titles on YouTube, presentations of Richard's, right? So we have,
I hope I've heard of some.
We have parenting in the age of digital technology. We have hyper innovation. COVID-19 can forever change the way we teach kids. Reimagining learning, rethinking digital citizenship, doing government differently to accelerate innovation, rethinking the user experience of higher ed. I didn't plan to read all those aloud as I started to type them into my notes as I was looking through YouTube. But as I did, I was like, man, one of the things I so admire about you and have since we've known each other for years, is that you've seen this field from a lot of really interesting perspectives. And I'm curious about how you see this moment for educators and learners, especially.
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this moment right now is a very disruptive moment, and it's a chaotic moment, and it's an uncomfortable moment. And that's what happens when you have a flubby year. It's what happens when you have many, many unexpected things. We've often had in education the sort of luxury of a lot of time for designing. Whether we design something good or bad, we can talk about, but we've had years and years to do that. We didn't have that luxury here. This was a very quick change, for all the reasons So in the moment, disruptive is the word that I can think of. But I think, and if you look at this, and I'm kind of a nerdy guy, in case you can't figure out by some of the names of those presentations, but one of the things that I've been really fascinated about, and I've spent a lot of my career studying, is why, how do people innovate, and where do innovations come from? And it's very interesting because often there's some patterns that you can see. And one important trend that you see is after a crisis, there's always a bloom of innovation. Right? So disruptive moment and then bloom of innovation, lots of new ideas, lots of creativity that actually sets up the field, whatever that is, for decades to come often. And so as uncomfortable as this moment is, I actually think that we are right in the middle of what will become a wave of innovation in how we think about learning, how we think about the role of technology in learning, how we think about teachers and preparing new teachers, and the roles of students and parents and all of that sort of stuff. That is actually going to really change for good what education looks like. And I do think, I believe this, and I can give some examples of why, but I believe that in hindsight, we will look back on this moment, this disruptive, chaotic, painful moment, and we will realize that it's probably one of the best things that ever happened for education. So
I love that. I'm going to let it soak in a little bit for folks. I think what I had a hunch in inviting you to come talk to us, and online today we have members of NAPS Network. We have anybody we tweeted it out to, and then obviously, like I'm sure a lot of the things that ISTE's up to right now, we're recording this broadcast, and then that will go onto our YouTube channel, and we'll continue to promote it. So what I suspected about inviting you to chat is that not only could we geek out together, we know each other as a couple of geeks, which I say with love and much fondness. But I also I had a hunch that yours would be an optimistic perspective, and not one that is not grounded in what's very real for our teachers and students right now, with all kinds of dimension, but noticing this moment as an important one. I want to shift a little bit and talk about ISTE.
Yeah.
You've brought a lot to ISTE in the last couple of years. People know ISTE as a network, as a conference. If you've been to the conference, you know what you were just mentioning. It is an extremely social event. It is very lively. It is very hands-on. Maybe one of the most hands-on I've ever been. Conferences I've ever been to. Other people know you as the standards people, right? So like ISTE is the digital literacy technology standards, and more. And so one of the questions I have for you is, how do you want people to know ISTE? Right. And has that changed at all in the last 6 months, as we're thinking about what this last 6 months has meant to the world and to a lot of organizations, NAF or ISTE no exception. It's changed. I think it's brought, in some ways, the best of what organizations have to offer to the surface, and for many others, it's really changed what we do. So I'm just curious at this moment in time, like, how do you want people to know ISTE, and how's that changed as a result of where we are?
Yeah. So the first question is, how do we want to be known, and what are we? And I think that is important. You know, there's a lot that we do, and there's a lot. We have events, and as you know, that you mentioned the standards. ISTE standards are adopted formally by every state in the U.S. and many countries around the world. We work in about 70 countries, so there's a lot that we do. But at the end of the day, if you were to boil it down to like, what's the core of ISTE? Our job is to help support the people side of technology and education, right? Our job is to help make sure teachers, leaders, policymakers, tech developers are really understanding the best ways to leverage technology to solve tough problems in education, right? So how are we using technology to help students learn better? How are we using technology to make learning a more inclusive experience? How are we using technology to help teachers feel more prepared and feel like they have a support network, right? Those are all of the types of problems that we're looking at. And so we're really focused on supporting people, helping them get the bench strength, the experience, the network that they need to make good decisions in their roles. So if you were to ask, you know, how things have changed, you know, you did ask how things have changed because of COVID. Really, it's just in many ways accelerated the work that we were already doing. So one quick example, you know, we have a great online learning experience. It's called ISTE-U, and ISTE-U has a whole series of accredited online topics, courses, classes, mini classes that you can take. Well, we have a class, I think it might be the only one, at least at a sort of nationally accredited level, class on how to teach in virtual spaces. Right, it's 4 micro courses that are packaged together, and it's called our Online Teaching Academy. And over the summer, we had over 20,000 teachers go through that program.
That's amazing.
So yeah, so I think this COVID moment has accelerated a lot of the work that we've already been doing. But our core mission of how do we use technology to help solve tough problems in education is, that has stayed true and will continue to be true years into the future.
I wonder to what extent you all are having the conversation internally about, the balance between being an organization that supports learning with technology versus becoming a tech company or becoming an ed tech company, or you know what I mean? And I think a lot of nonprofits, especially right now, are wondering the extent to which they need to make tech an internal part of their operation versus continue to do what they do and add people out there, contractors and folks in the field. So to what extent are you all having that conversation and or have already started to sort of shift to a more sort of tech enabled institution?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our case, we sort of were already there just by the nature of who we are and what we do. But I do feel like it's a good question that I think we all have to be asking. And one of the pieces of that is how do we make sure that the types of tools that are being built are really meeting the needs of educators, right? For whatever, whether it's helping teachers collaborate, whether it's helping with direct instruction to kids. And so something that we've been doing more of lately, we work closely with ed tech developers, and we've been really pushing to try to facilitate, to help them make better products. And so giving them information on what we're doing, some of our work around the learning sciences and what we know about learning science and how you can bake in principles of learning research, of learning science into products to make them better is one thing. Another is just helping broker the input and feedback that we have from our community. So the ISTE community, we have about probably 500,000 or so educators that we have some engagement with in a given year. And there's lots of input and feedback that we get that we then help try to package in a way that can be useful for people that are building tools and products. Because for far too long, there wasn't enough of this loop. There wasn't enough of this sort of like iterative conversation between people that were developing the software or tools of any sort and educators. And so we see ourselves a little bit as like an EdTech Switzerland and trying to kind of pull together the different sides, the research side, the practitioner side, and the developer side, and say, hey, let's have a more meaningful conversation about what to do here.
If you had a couple, like let's say you had 2 or 3 things that you feel like a broken record on as you talk to the ed tech companies, what are those 2 or 3 things?
What a fun question. I wish wow.
Be a broken record one more time.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I'll tell you a couple of my broken records ones. So one of them is needing to recognize that their product is never ever used in isolation, right? It's always used as a suite of tools in a teacher's or a student's, toolbox. And so they need to recognize that, and they need to be able to easily be interoperable with other tools. They need to have their data play nicely with other data that the teacher or student needs to collect. So that's one. Another one that I sort of, I feel like I bring up a lot is there needs to be a much deeper understanding of learning science in the education developer space. There are a lot of great things that we know so much about how learning works, right? There's so many things that there are questions about, right? There will always be, but there's so much that we just know. We know how people learn. We know some really solid principles, and yet those are often not baked into learning products. And so that's thing 2. Thing 3, I would probably say is, there's so many. I have to usability. I think it'd be another one. I'd have to say usability. So a lot of education software doesn't make the experience as awesome as it should be. And part of that is because I think we as educators have become a little complacent about what we accept when it comes to tools, right? And so if tools don't function, if they're not easy to use, if they're not compelling and engaging, if they're not, unfortunately, we've put up with that for a while. Yeah. And that's not okay. It's not okay to have a tool that isn't simple and easy to use and works well for young children, has accessibility features built in. Those are the sorts of, design, that level of design just needs to be a given. And so that's another thing that I would push on. So anyway, that was like 10 things for my 3, but those are some of those comments that we bring up over and over again.
Yeah, one of the things I heard you say that I just want to make sure I got correctly is, and maybe you didn't say this exactly, but I wonder if it's what you mean. The first one that you said was kind of about not being a solo operator. Nobody is coming into a school and saying this is going to solve all your problems. The kind of and what that makes me think of is the kind of one size fits all, or not one size fits all, but it's like does everything platform, right? Yeah. So people love the acronym LMS.
Yeah.
It's residue from higher ed.
Yep.
As far as I know, unless there's some deeper origin to it. But the idea of the LMS sort of suggests that for K-12, sort of bringing LMS into the context of K-12 suggests that K-12 has a similar procurement process, a similar ecosystem, et cetera, which it is not even remotely, right? So the idea that an LMS can succeed on a college campus is one thing, because all professors can be using, similar tools and these kinds of things. I think what I hear you saying in a way is that this is not really the ecosystem in which K-12 teachers are operating, that instead we need to figure out how to present solutions that work alongside other things, and are not designed to do everything at once, because teachers have a lot of tools doing a lot of things, but rather support filling gaps and doing better some of the things that have been sort of inadequate thus far.
Well, that's right. And I would say, so I'm going to actually double down on that. So we also do quite a bit of work in the higher ed space. And I would say that also now holds true in higher ed. So this idea that you can have this one platform that does everything and that's all we're going to be, it's just ridiculous. It just doesn't work. Look, how many of you have a phone and have, one app on it? Of course you don't. You have like 100 apps on my phone, and some I use more than others. Some I only need in a certain context. But like, what a ridiculous idea would that be? And so this thought that like there's just one tool that we can use for delivering everything just doesn't. That's not a model that makes sense anymore. And we have to recognize that both as educators, but also as the people that are building the tools, and they need to know that they got to play well in the sandbox with everything else.
Yeah. Amen to that. One of the things that I promised I would ask you about is a little bit about policy. Obviously you spent a really important part of your career at the DOE in DC and directing the Office of Education Technology and under the Obama administration. And I want to talk a little bit about policy and wonder with you about what policies you feel desperately need attention, especially in the context of COVID, and then also if you're seeing any bright spots out there, as you have chatter from state to state and the you have a much wider perspective than I do. I wonder if you can share with us just, what do you feel personally needs attention? B, what are the bright spots that you're hearing about?
Yeah. So one of the areas that I feel like really needs attention is thinking about how we're preparing new teachers. So you could argue that even our traditional teacher preparation process, had some challenges. I think everybody could kind of agree with that. But the COVID experience has hyper accelerated that. And so the programs that we're seeing, the experience that we're seeing at most teacher prep institutions are not aligned with the reality of what schools need. And we hear over and over again now, particularly when it comes to technology, we hear over and over again schools saying, hey, we're actually doing pretty good. We got all of our teachers, even teachers that have been around a long time, we're getting up to speed. We're using technology effectively, but we cannot keep on top of having to retrain all the brand new teachers that are coming in, not prepared to use technology. In fact, I'll give you a little bit of a preview of coming attractions. So at our event in November, we're going to be releasing a new a report that we've been doing with some fantastic researchers that basically have been speaking to and interviewing graduates that have come out of teacher prep programs. And they, by far, they say the top thing that they feel not prepared for is how to walk into these highly digital classrooms, and they've had no experience with it. So that's a huge thing that has to change. And that is an area where, at the federal level, certainly at the state level, policy can have a big impact on making sure the curriculum that's being provided to incoming teachers, if they're getting their license, that's a control gate, right? If they're getting their license, that it at least meets the needs of schools. So that's one thing. I also think just in general, teacher learning and teacher professional development, we have seen a huge focus on funding infrastructure. We've seen a huge focus on funding connectivity, and I'm glad, like we need to, in fact, we need to continue to do that, right? But what we have not seen is the equivalent focus on teacher training to make sure we're using that technology in the most effective way. And I think that's another area where both state and federal policy makers can have a big impact. You've talked about some bright spots. There are really none at the federal level, and I don't say that from a position. ISTE we work across the aisle. We work with anybody and everybody. But right now, the team at the Department of Ed is kind of asleep at the wheel, and that's just how it is. We've worked with fantastic teams from both, Republican, Democrat, either way, and they've done great things there. That is not what this is, right? This is just truly a team that's not this. The batteries are dead. So that said, at the state level, we've seen some really amazing things happen, right? We've seen there's a great level of creativity. We work with the state of Utah has put a really great focus on trying to prepare teachers in this way that I'm talking about here, getting them the experience that they need. We have seen we're working with the state of California right now to help create what's kind of like a vision document or guide for how to use technology effectively. There is some great stuff happening at the states, and I do that gives me hope, right?
Yeah, I wonder what you are feeling about where we are with student data. Right. So student data privacy is one of the areas where states are, sort of moving, not quite as fast as they were a couple of years ago, but are moving. And one of the things that I'm sure you've been part of conversations around is this issue for ed tech of, wanting desperately to engage schools and help educators have the right tools, et cetera. It is really hard for organizations. You almost have to have a separate operation to have everything in place as it relates to student privacy. And I wonder if there are things being discussed or things you're hearing out there in terms of best practices where we can better streamline. Maybe it's product even. There are those sort of single sign-on organizations out there that are trying to get districts sort of signed on to one platform. Is there anything you're seeing out there that gives you hope about being able to do both, protect students' privacy, first priority, and at the same time present innovation, which really relies on a quick sort of cycle of adoption and feedback?
Yeah. So absolutely. By the way, it is not mutually exclusive to be able to protect students' data and have innovative use of tech products, right? Like that idea that you can't do both just isn't true. And we can do that, but it requires some thinking. And so there's some things that we need to do about it. So one is on the developer side, they just need to be very transparent about what they're doing with the data. And sometimes it's not clear. And sometimes there are, these long, weird legal documents that you have to read through to figure it out. And that's just not okay, right? We just need very simple, what are you doing with the data? Just tell me right up front, what are you doing with the data? And that's one thing that we need to do. On the other side, and by the way, there are some great initiatives going on. There's an initiative called Project Unicorn. There's a number of other initiatives of companies that can opt in to complying with guidelines, which makes it a lot easier for schools because then they know this company has agreed to do these sorts of things with the data. And so that's very powerful. But the other thing is that we also just need to make sure that our students and teachers and parents are getting value out of the data. And let me explain this because this might sound a little bit, might rub some people the wrong way.
Sure.
We have parents that are like, well, I wouldn't, you take my kid's data. How could you use that in that learning system? And then they hand them a phone and give them a game that's sucking all their data. And and there's with no problem. And you're like, wait a minute. Like, if you're really concerned about data, why are you allowing all these activities that are way riskier than this piece of software over here? And I think at the end of the day, part of it is because of value, right? So as a parent, I have 4 kids, right? As a parent, I am much more likely to be comfortable letting my kids' data be used for something if I get value out of it. And if I don't, right, if it's like, we're going to, we want to use access to your kids' data and, you'll never know why, right? You don't get a good report or something that helps them, then that's not very, very helpful for me. And so just remembering, if we're asking for parents or teachers or students to share their data or their kids' data, what's the return on that? What's the exchange rate that we get? Many of us use the Google suite, right? It's not free. We are paying for it. We are paying for it with our data. They are looking at all kinds of data. They know what's in our emails. They know it is incredible how much data of ours we are willing to give them. It's in exchange for a really good email system, productivity suite. And so I think that same equation has to come into place when it talks about education data. We're going to be much more interested in likely and willing to share our data if there's great value that we're getting from it.
I feel like we could have a separate hour on student data, because it's rich, and I have about a dozen follow-up questions for you to hear more, including. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, by the way, I was going to say one other thing that we just have to remember too, because we were talking a little about policy. So the federal policy that governs student data is something called FERPA, which some of you may be familiar with. It was passed in 1974. It really hasn't been significantly updated since then. And so in 74, the technology that the data that we were using was a file cabinet with a lock on it, right? So so how do you have a federal law that is trying to govern use of data on devices that was made before people had computers, much less mobile devices? So that's another piece of it, is that we really need to get an updated privacy law that makes sense and that allows for the way we need to use the data to help our kids, to personalize learning, to give us information about how they're performing, but also is actually meaningful and useful for the developers.
There's a whole comedy routine somewhere that I'm not smart enough to arrive at quickly enough, but related to the fact that we wrote and passed FERPA not long after Watergate. Speaking of data in a file cabinet, and look how secure that was. So now we're using it this many decades later,
right,
to provide guidance in an era where things have just changed so vastly.
Right.
There's no way people would have anticipated upon passing FERPA what things look like now. Which brings me to a different kind of policy question. And I'm going to cue you up with a great story I've heard you tell before. I want you to tell us about the story of peanut butter through a straw. Right. And the reason I'm hoping you'll tell this story is because I just want to talk about the divide, digital divide, the gap, divide, gap, giant gaping chasm, however people want to call it. I am curious to touch base about how you're seeing the digital divide. Is it an antiquated term? I think that there's a whole group thinking that for some reason, this all went away with previous legislation, or we've somehow solved these things. So do you think it's gone away? How do you think it's changed? And if you would just tell us the story about peanut butter through a straw.
Sure. So a lot there, and I'll try to quickly give some responses. So the first thing is the question about the digital divide. And so there was some previous legislation. In fact, it was stuff that I helped work on when my team was at the Department of Ed, and that was to update a program called E-Rate. And E-Rate is a federal program actually run by the FCC that helps cover cost of internet for schools. And when I started my job at the Department of Ed, we had about 12 to 15% of schools that had access to broadband in the classroom, right? Which is crazy, because at that time, if you could think about it, and the president used to say this, you could go to any Starbucks in the country and have free Wi-Fi while you were waiting online, and yet our kids in schools didn't have it. And so we went through this big process and overhauled that program, et cetera. And the result of that was that by the time the end of the Obama administration, we had 98% of schools connected to broadband in the classroom. So, essentially closed the gap there. Now, is there still more that needs to be done? Should it be faster? Should it be better? Yes, absolutely. But the schools sort of had ubiquitous internet connectivity finally, which they had not before. So that's the first part of it. But that program stopped at the door of the school. And so what it did not do and does not help is if a kid goes home and has no ability to access the internet from home. And the Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, who's a good friend of mine, she's a FCC commissioner, calls that the homework gap, right? And so one of the things that there is some movement for now is to try to help make some adjustments so that it could help cover the cost of hotspots or other things to help kids get internet connectivity at home, which they currently can't. So yes, there's still a gap, although we've made huge progress in the fact that at least schools are connected. So that was the first part of what you're asking.
Yep.
The second part is, remind me the second thing that you were asking.
Tell us peanut butter through a straw.
Oh, peanut butter through a straw. Yes, I know. I was like, there was something else in there that was good. Okay. So this is a true story. In fact, I'm writing a book right now on digital citizenship and thinking about how we need to teach kids, prepare kids to be more effective, just members of the virtual community. And I just wrote this story just the other day in the chapter of that book. So it's fresh in my mind.
That's great.
So when I was working for the Department of Ed, I was talking to a group of teachers in South Carolina, and I gave this whole presentation. I did like an hour presentation of how you could use technology to be, make your class more engaging and help students have access to experts from other parts of the world. And I just sort of went on and did this great presentation. And at the end of the presentation, I said, "Do you have any questions?" And I was sort of expecting, people to raise their hand and tell me how great my presentation was, because it was pretty good. I did a good job. And so I was all excited about that. And I was like, tell me what question, how did you get to be so awesome, right? I don't know what I was expecting, but something. So this teacher way in the back of the room, I can still see her today. I can remember this whole room. I can just remember the whole thing. I was standing on this stage, very back of the room. This teacher raised her hand and she said, "Son," and I knew I was in trouble probably at that point, but she said, "Son, have you ever tried to drink peanut butter from a straw?" And I actually didn't know what I was like, is that maybe like a tradition in South Carolina that I don't know about? I don't know. And so I said, "No, say more." And she proceeded to tell me in no uncertain terms that trying to drink peanut butter from the straw was the best way she could describe trying to get access to the internet from her classroom. And that was really a telling moment. She said, and pretty directly, she said, "How dare you come down and tell me all the great things that I can do with technology if I can't even get a solid internet connection?"
Yep.
And that actually was a lot of the inspiration that led to, at least for me, to help do this push to get schools connected. And I'm super proud of that. And I'm super proud of the work that we did that so that teachers don't have to drink peanut butter from a straw. But unfortunately, the reality is that kids are still drinking peanut butter from a straw from many homes around the country. And I see pictures. I was just talking to some schools the other day where their kids are sitting out in the parking lot on their laptops trying to get connectivity so they can submit their homework, right? That's not okay. It's really not okay for our country in a world where we need to consider internet a basic utility at this point. And we have the means to do it. We have the programs to do it. We literally just need the regulations to be shifted a bit through the FCC in order to allow that to happen.
I do want to, I'll give a quick shout out while I'm going to have you read this question from an anonymous Facebook user here. No biggie. It's kind of a giant question. I will give a shout out, which is if you are facing that issue, kids sitting in parking lots in order to gain access in your community, I want to point everybody to an amazing story in the Central Valley of California of Digital Nest, which is an organization that was founded by a gentleman named Jacob Martinez, who is incredible. but building a set of centers that are, sort of digital age drop-in after-school centers that provide. So it will blow your mind some of the things that they are doing there to support the community, in addition to the idea that young people should not be sitting in parking lots to connect. So the question from Facebook is, if if you were to have free reign or become president of the U.S. tomorrow, what's the first thing you would do to improve education policy, teacher prep, or education technology?
Yeah. Wow. How long do we have here? Let's see. I do a lot of things in the first day. I'll tell you that. Well, a couple big things that I'll tell you, and it won't surprise you having heard the, being part of this conversation that we just had here. But one of them is, I would stop for a moment and say, we need to rethink how we consider the profession, the career of educators, right? We have deprofessionalized the career in a way that I think is truly damaging for our country. So there's one moment where we need to say, let's just stop and talk for a second about how do we make sure education is viewed, going into education is viewed as a highly prestigious career, and where we give the supports needed to make sure a highly qualified and diverse group of educators are coming in every year, as is done in many other developing countries, right? And I think that's one of the first, and should be one of the first things on the agenda for the U.S. Department of Education, is really raising this sort of profile of the profession of teaching. So that's one. Yeah. Next thing I would do is I would chart a clear education research agenda. So we spend a tiny fraction of research, certainly at the federal level, dollars on education. It is a tiny fraction. If you look at where we've spent research in the military, and I'm not talking about actually military operations. I mean just research on ideas for the military, on science, on other areas, it dwarfs what we spend on education, and that's not okay. And we need very practical, very, very effective research. And by the way, the type of research that is just kind of esoteric studies that are published in journals that only other researchers that are publishing in those journals read is not okay. We have so many tough questions that we have to have. So that's the second thing. And then I think if I were to pick a third one, is I would set a really ambitious goal to bring back some, what I call moonshots, right? And so here's what I mean by this: is that we have become, I feel, a little bit complacent with our the pace of innovation in education. Right? There are so many tough problems and so many brilliant people and technologists and researchers out there, but there isn't anybody catalyzing them in the way that we really need to in order to really make some huge leaps forward in education. And I believe that's an incredibly important role of the president or the secretary of education, is to say, we are going to have some moonshot moments. We are going to aim big. We're going to fund them, and we're going to show that you can actually make amazing things happen in the learning experience for kids. We can have exponential leaps in their progress if we're willing to really double down and make this a national priority. And we just haven't. We work, as I mentioned, ISTE works in countries all around the world, in 70 countries around the world. In most countries, when there's a presidential debate, one of the topics that comes up is education, because voters vote and they make a decision on your president based on decisions about education. In the US, it almost never comes up in a debate. Even in a more, less flubber year than this one, it doesn't come up. And that narrative, we have to change that. And if we're going to continue to be an innovative country, an innovative culture, to lead in the creativity space, we have to start making some really exciting transformations in education. And that doesn't happen without strong leadership. So there you go.
So I hope you don't mind that I'm going to be. I'll write you in next Tuesday. I really, I love your vision, and moonshots in education. I feel like we should. I don't know. We should build an entire campaign around that idea. I love it.
We should. And by the way, there's a great book. So some of you know Esther Wojcicki, who she's a teacher at Palo Alto School. She wrote a nice book on moonshots in education. So if you're interested in learning more about opportunities there, check out her book.
Wonderful. I will, not only will I check out the book, but I will also drop it in the notes for the video. If you're, for folks who are watching on YouTube, you can come back and check out the notes. I will put it there.
By the way, somebody else also asked earlier in the chat about the ISTE's Teacher Online Teaching Academy. And so that's just, if you just search for ISTEU Online Teaching Academy, you'll get it. But we can also make sure that gets in the links too.
I'm going to put that both of those in.
Yep.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes, and I have I have a wrap up question designed for this moment.
Okay.
So one thing we share in common between ISTE and NAF, we're two nonprofits doing everything we can to support the kind of vision and transformation for education that our networks believe deeply in. And so I'm curious what ISTE is finding right now about the best way to be a partner. This is something we're thinking all the time about, and I wonder how we can learn together.
Thank you for asking. I think it's a great question. And one of the things that I think one of these sort of unexpected silver linings of COVID is it's forced more collaboration and partnership in the education space. Look, the problems that we're dealing with, the tough things that we're dealing with in education right now, they are too big for any one organization to just handle on their own. Even large, effective organizations, right? NAF and ISTE are examples of that. But like, we on our own cannot solve these tough problems. So we have to work together. And so we did, when COVID happened, ISTE formed a COVID coalition. We had 80 organizations, education organizations, come together to help think about how we could respond to this moment. I can't think of any other moment when 80 organizations have ever come together for anything in education before. So there's this hope for me that this will continue to happen. And so my advice, I guess, to answer the question is just start, talking to other organizations, right? Start building those bridges and start recognizing and internalizing that if we really want to make an impact for kids, we can't go it alone, and we have to find ways to work together in teams to make this happen. And when we do, amazing things happen because we can combine the talents that we have and really start to address some of these tough challenges that we're seeing in some amazingly creative ways.
Richard, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure we drop before we stop the video?
Look, the one thing I'll say, I'll add one quick
please,
ending point, which is, and I mentioned it briefly because I mentioned that I'm actually starting to write a book on this right now, but I am deeply concerned that we are not spending enough time and energy helping prepare our kids to be effective members of the virtual world. We talk a little bit about online safety, don't share your password, don't be a jerk online, don't share a picture you'll regret, right? But like, that is such a thin, narrow slice of what you need to be effective in a digital world. And we're not talking about being tolerant people in virtual spaces. We're not talking about how to not nearly enough anyway, talking about how to use technology as a force for good in your communities, right? We're not talking about how to create inclusive spaces. Our digital citizenship now that we're talking about is very selfish, frankly. It's like, watch out for yourself. But we need to be flipping that to say, how do you create safe spaces for others in virtual spaces? So the last, maybe a comment that I would make is, let's take this moment as we're all shifting from doing a lot of our life activities in a physical space to a virtual space. Let's take this moment as a chance to reset and rethink how we're teaching digital citizenship and how we're preparing kids to be very active contributors in the virtual space, not just giving them a list of don'ts, not just giving them a list of things not to do, but really helping them, be leaders and effective community members in a virtual community.
Yeah, and if I may, for parents who are, you are a parent 4 times over, and I have 3 kids at home, and the time for either, being in a polar state where we're either villainizing the web and tech, or we're for it or against it, is over. There is so much more dimension. And I think your point about better preparing young people for what those environments afford, and better preparing parents and teachers and all kinds of folks who support human development, I couldn't possibly think of a better place for us to land is thinking more about that literacy and those skills. Richard, I'm really grateful that you came to spend an hour with us. I can't thank you enough. And I hope you will let us know how NAF can continue to be a partner to ISTE and how our network, over 600 academies nationally, can continue to join with ISTE in some of the important things that we're moving forward. So, so thank you.
More soon. Thanks for the chance to come talk with you. It's always a pleasure. Next time, hopefully, we'll get to do it face to face. But this is great, and truly, thanks for the work of both that you're doing and your team, but also all the members of NAF. Right? I mean, this is a huge and powerful network for good, and particularly in this moment, if you can be thinking about how do we get ahead of some of these issues that we've been talking about around digital citizenship, around preparing teachers. Right? Like this is a moment to really change the trajectory of the future, and I think you and the members of your network are really kind of the people we need to be looking for to watch that happen. So anyway, thanks for all you're doing. Great to talk to you, Marc. We'll definitely talk soon.
We thank you so much, Richard.